Welcome, Professor Johnson. Yeah, happy to see you.
Hello.
Hello,
Good to see
happy
you.
to see you, Professor Johnson.
Pleasure.
Yeah, we can start exactly 6 o'clock, Professor.
Good evening, Ms. Johnson. Very good evening. How do you do?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Thank you for joining with us. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and experience. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Start, sir. You can start, sir.
Okay, sir. Yeah. Good evening to one and all. I warm welcome you all for 15-day International Virtual FDP on Teaching, Learning, Assessing in 2030. Education is all about creating an environment of academic freedom where bright mind meets discover and learn. One would experience top of the world living and learning experience at SRM. SRM Institute of Engineering, Science and Technology is one of the top ranking universities in India with over 60,000 students and 3,500 faculties offering a wide range of undergraduate, postgraduate and doctoral programs in various branches. Students have a wide choice of cutting edge program including nanotechnology and other subjects. SRM IST has been aggregated by NAC with the highest rank grade. So now I request Dr. Priyadarshini, Assistant Professor of the Physics Department, SRM IST Ramapuram, take over the session. Ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Good evening to one and all present here. A very warm welcome to you all for Day 2 International Faculty Development Program on Teaching, Learning and Assessing in 2030. I feel privileged to have each and every one of you here today joining us in this educational excellence organized by Department of Physics, SRM, Institute of Science and Technology, Chennai, Tamil Nadu. Now I request our coordinator, Dr. Sanjurani ma'am, to introduce today's guest. Ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Very good evening, everyone. Today we have Professor Marcus L. Johnson, Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University, US, who is going to speak on research and teaching strategies for conceptual learning. Dr. Marcus Johnson is a professor in the Educational Psychology and Educational Research and Evaluation program in the School of Education at Virginia Tech. He joined the Virginia Tech in 2021 following his decade-plus tenure at University of Cincinnati, where he was the proud recipient of 2090 UC Faculty Exemplary Service Award in the recognition of his services and leadership on the Faculty Senate Committee for Research and Scholarship and Human Relation Faculty and Enrichment Center and the School of Education's PhD Council nationally. Dr. Johnson earned his PhD in Education Psychology at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and for over the decade, he has enjoyed the teaching various courses at higher education from human development to human learning, and from the educational assessment to research methods. Prior to his work in higher education, Dr. Johnson had taught higher school science in diverse settings. Dr. Johnson has held leadership role in the American Psychological Association's Division 15. His research concerning motivation in education has included the investigation of traditional and non-traditional college student motivations, the use of motivational strategies that enhance cognitive and engagement and learning, the effect of policies and practices on the both student and faculty motivation. With this short introduction, I would like to invite Dr. Johnson to take over the session. Sir, floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. And can everyone hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, if at any time I have any audio issues, please just get my attention and I'll try to correct things. But thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the warm welcome. I sincerely appreciate it. Again, my research topic or my talk today is titled Research and Teaching Strategies for Conceptual Learning. And again, thank you for that introduction that really summarizes my inspiration for today's conversation. So as mentioned, I'm currently a full professor of educational psychology and education at Virginia Tech. My academic background is I hold a bachelor's degree in human development from the University of California at Davis, a teaching credential in secondary science education from the University of California, Irvine. I did my graduate studies at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And again, I was a faculty member at the University of Cincinnati for over a decade. I have done tremendous or have had multiple service roles with the American Psychological Association and the American Educational Research Association. And a lot can be found presented in journals associated with those two organizations. My research interests are primarily in motivation, so student motivation and understanding motivation and cognition. It was during my graduate studies really that I started to apply my interest and expertise in motivation to the area known as conceptual change. And so that's really what my talk today is conceptual change, knowledge, and how to facilitate that. So in defining conceptual knowledge, it's important and how it's potentially applicable view. Conceptual knowledge is unique in terms of the world of cognition. When it comes to acquiring facts, figures, names, dates, and locations, or memorizing these things, that's all characterized by what we call declarative knowledge. So again, knowing the names and dates of certain events, it's characteristic of what we call declarative knowledge. And then procedural knowledge is characterized by knowing how to do something, okay? Conceptual knowledge, however, is more complex than the other two. Conceptual knowledge is a more complex understanding of interrelationships among multiple pieces of knowledge, including between multiple pieces of declarative and procedural knowledge. And here are some examples of conceptual topics that are covered. Conceptual change research has historically been about remedying and overcoming science misconceptions. And so we see a lot of conceptual change research in the area of science and math education. Conceptions can include things like understanding not only how to do calculations or how to think about numbers, but how to actually appropriately carry out an equation, understanding why you might carry out an equation in a certain way, understanding or having conceptual understandings in physics of how a moving projectile moves. In biology, which is a little more within my background, I've studied conceptual understandings and misconceptions concerning the progression of infectious diseases, such as the cold or flu. And so there are misconceptions that people have about the use of antibiotics to try to treat viral diseases. And so in trying to facilitate learning, conceptual learning, there have been scholars like Streich and Posner who have proposed a series of what I call ingredients to facilitate conceptual change. And in the early 1990s, I would say the late 1980s and early 1990s, Streich and Posner proposed that to facilitate conceptual change, an educator needs to try to get a learner to become dissatisfied with their current conception, to present the new conceptions in a way that's intelligible, plausible, and fruitful. Okay, and so this was an early model of conceptual change. And so educators, of course, would try to follow these instructions or make sure that their teaching strategies included these things of dissatisfaction, and making sure that a new concept is intelligible, plausible, and fruitful. But change is hard. Conceptual change is hard. Conceptual change is difficult, and again, it's because of the complexity of the interrelationships among multiple pieces of knowledge that make conceptual learning hard. And it's not always intuitive. So on this slide, I have illustrated, an image of a flat Earth and an image of a rather, negative 40 degrees Celsius in terms of, or negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit in terms of coldness. And their misconceptions persist in spite of when you present things in an intelligible way, in spite of when you present things in a plausible way or fruitful way, even when somebody's dissatisfied with their action. Getting an individual to overcome their misconceptions, to actually engage or experience conceptual change, takes more than just those things that Strike and Posner had suggested. So, the image of the flat Earth, for example, when we asked, and my colleagues had done a study in which they asked third graders, so 8-year-olds, 8 and 9-year-olds, what's the shape of the Earth? And a lot of them said the shape of the Earth is circular, right? And when we probed deeper and we asked them, okay, can you describe the shape of the Earth? They described it as a circle, but also being flat, like a pancake. And so they seem to have a mild understanding of the shape of the Earth, but instead of being spherical, they describe it as still being flat like a pancake, because a lot of us experience the world as being flat. We walk on flat streets. We build houses and buildings on a flat plane. We think about directions and maps in a two-dimensional space. And so it's not always intuitive, and it's not always our experience of the world being spherical. Similarly, it's not always intuitive. So climate change isn't something that I think is always intuitive to people. When people think of climate change, they oftentimes think initially of global warming. And there are people who say, well, where I live, I still experience cold weather. So my personal experience doesn't align with this notion of global warming. So I don't really believe in climate change or really conceptualize how climate change works. I'm experiencing the world as still being cold. And so again, conceptual change is hard, and it's not always intuitive. And so in the late 1990s and early 2000s, I would say, my mentor, Dr. Gail Sinatra and her colleague, Janice Dull, presented a new model of conceptual change that went beyond Strike and Posner's, what I would call, linear model of conceptual change. So Dull and Sinatra described conceptual change as being more complex. They did hold on to elements that Strike and Posner described, where they said, yes, a learner should still see their current conception as, or be dissatisfied with their current conception. When you present a new conception, yes, it should still be presented in a plausible way. But Dull and Sinatra went further and described that, well, the learner should have, there should be personal relevance. We should take social context into account when trying to facilitate conceptual change. And if we these things, hopefully, attend to all these things, hopefully we can get the learner to engage with us as educators. And if we can get engagement to be high enough and strong enough, then hopefully we can get strong conceptual change. And again, Dr. Gail Sinatra was my mentor. And when she presented me with this model, I immediately took notice of what she had listed here as motivation. As again, my primary interest is in understanding student motivation and how it applies to learning. And so again, this was a theoretical model of conceptual change that Dole and Sinatra put forward. And so they hadn't yet tested all the elements of this model. And so it brought me to consider, well, one of the big motivational theories in education is that of experience or expectancy value theory. Value theory suggests that if a learner expects to do well on a task and has a value for the task, then they should experience higher achievement. And so there are different types of values though. There's what's called utility value, attainment value. There's also intrinsic value and cost value. I particularly was most interested in seeing if I can motivate students with a utility value and attainment value, whether by motivating students with these two values, whether I can get them to engage in the material more and experience conceptual change. So as I mentioned previously, I had a background in science education, particularly biology. And so a topic that I chose to facilitate conceptual change was on the topic of the common cold, or what's also known as the rhinovirus. And there are a lot of misconceptions about the common cold. There are misconceptions about how many times a person can catch it every year, how many or how one acquires the virus in the first place. Treatments for the virus, like I had previously mentioned, there's a misconception that antibiotics can be used to treat the common cold or even influenza. And so so the topic that I chose was that of the common cold. And again, I recruited 166 education majors, and I induced them with a utility value, an attainment value, or no value at all. And my expectation was that by inducing students with a utility or attainment value, again, they would have high engagement in the content and therefore experience conceptual change. And so the results were the utility condition rated their engagement as significantly higher than the control condition, and the utility condition demonstrated the greatest degree of conceptual change compared to both the attainment and control conditions. And so what my research, the key takeaways from my own research on this is that one, we find that yes, you can in fact induce students or learners with different motivations. So that's good for my research on motivation. We also take away from this study that motivation can energize the high level of engagement needed for strong conceptual change, which is also a plus. And that different motivations can lead people to different conceptual understandings though. That, I think, was a unique finding, in that those who we induced with a utility value gave more attention and experienced more conceptual change on issues or content and material that was more useful and personally relevant to them. Those that we induced with an attainment value tended to learn more what I would call the surface level or definitional parts of the concept of the common cold and how that progresses. But wait, even when a learner experiences conceptual change, their newfound conceptual understanding could still be fleeting. So let me go back for a second. In my own research, I induced learners with different motivations. And those learners, in fact, experienced conceptual change. They learned more about the common cold, what causes it, how it progresses. They experienced what I would consider strong conceptual change, or what I thought was strong conceptual change. But something still happened. So if I waited for 2 weeks or a month or longer, and I would reassess learners' conceptual understanding of the common cold, many would revert back to their misconceptions, their previous misconceptions. So even though they experienced conceptual change, they still, over time, defaulted to their early conceptions. So what's happening? This return back to prior misconceptions led me and my colleagues, Dr. Lewis Nadelson and others, to rethink to reconsider a new model of conceptual change, which we call the dynamic model of conceptual change. And so again, this encompasses the models that I had earlier from Strike and Posner. Again, that the message should be plausible, that we take motivation into account from Dole and Sinatra's model of conceptual change. But what makes this particular model of conceptual change different than the others is that it's more dynamic, it's more cyclical, and it also suggests multiple exit points for people's conceptual things. And so, as I said in my earlier research, I got conceptual change. Learners in my study experienced conceptual change. But again, given enough time, their prior conception remained dominant, and they reverted back to their prior misconceptions. So even though during my study, during my experiment, they accepted that, okay, yes, the common cold is caused by a virus. It can't be, that just being outside and cold does not give you the virus. That antibiotics can't be used to treat it. But again, what happens over time is that learners will return back home. They'll return back to their families and friends, and their families and friends, it could be the case that their families and friends hold on to misconceptions and continue to share that with the learner. And so over time, yes, they experience conceptual change in my study, but over time, in their interactions with family and friends, their family and friends might reinforce the idea of, oh, don't go outside barefoot or you'll catch the cold. Don't go outside with wet hair or you'll catch the cold. Don't go outside without a jacket or you'll catch the cold. And so so again, their prior conceptions might remain dominant because it could potentially be reinforced again by family and friends that they return home to. So what are things that educators can do, though, to not only facilitate conceptual change, but to make sure that you get strong conceptual change when you're teaching? One of the things that I should have included on the slide is don't be afraid to repeat lessons, or not repeat whole lessons, but do not be afraid to repeat key messages that you want your students to take away. So again, you know, I should have included that on this particular slide. That I wish that in my case, in my own study, that I created multiple opportunities to repeat the message about the appropriate conceptions for the common cold. But other useful strategies that many of you can consider when teaching your classes, and if you're trying to facilitate conceptual learning. You could utilize you could take a reputational approach and use what we call refutation texts, or directly refute misconceptions in your classroom. So if you know of students' misconceptions, or if a student during your class brings up a misconception, you can directly refute it, or you can present it in a way that again refutes it through text or your instructional activities. And so one of the strategies for refutation text is to identify a common misconception, to acknowledge that, or to acknowledge why that misconception is common, it could be commonplace, and then refuting that misconception. And what that does is it lets a learner know that if the learner themselves has the misconception, and they share that misconception that is identified, that they don't feel alone. They don't feel like they're the only ones who have this misconception. And so that opens them up emotionally and motivationally to hearing what is the correct conception. So reputational strategies I have found to be effective, not foolproof, but there are reputational interventions that can facilitate conceptual change. Something that a lot of educators are finding popular, especially across the last decade, are inquiry, problem-based, project-based learning, where they have students weigh or work with different evidence, and by working with different evidence, arrive at a correct conception. There are, I want to acknowledge that misconceptions exist in all academic disciplines and in all areas. So, like I said, historically, I've studied I've studied conceptual change from a science perspective. My colleagues have studied conceptual change from when it comes to math misconceptions, but there are misconceptions all around us. There are misconceptions about history. There are misconceptions in language arts. There are misconceptions in social sciences. And so, do know that conceptual change isn't just confined, or misconceptions don't only exist in science and math. They exist in all of our disciplines, medicine, engineering, like I said, language arts, social science. And so I've seen that in the social sciences, these bottom two strategies or approaches can be readily adapted or adopted for to facilitate conceptual change in these other areas. Reenactments, facilitating debates and argumentation. Role playing can also potentially facilitate conceptual change. And I arrive at this slide, and really this is where I provide some of my take-home messages concerning conceptual change research and conceptual change learning. What can you do as educators to facilitate conceptual learning in your classes? Well, my first recommendation, of course, is to take time to learn about your learners' preconceptions and misconceptions. What are the misconceptions that exist in your classroom? What are the misconceptions that students bring into your classroom? You know, of course, we would like to be able to just present the content in a way that's fruitful, plausible, intelligible, and hope that just by presenting things in that way that students will automatically get it. But students come into your class already with misconceptions that are rooted deeply in them, or potentially rooted deeply in them. And so just presenting things again in a plausible, intelligible, fruitful way does not always get them to experience strong conceptual change. So again, my first message to everyone is to take time to learn about your students' misconceptions. What are they coming to your classroom with? As a motivational scholar, another message that I want to share with everybody is to diversify your motivational strategies. Do not just have one strategy, to try to motivate all students, because one strategy to motivate all students is not likely going to reach all students. So again, diversify your motivational strategies. Strategies for that encourage mastery. Strategies that are what's called autonomy supportive. Strategies that allow students to feel a sense of belonging in your classroom. So again, to have a diverse motivational strategies. And as I said previously, with that, don't be afraid to repeat concepts in your class. A lot of educators, I think a lot of beginning educators feel that repeating things is unnecessary. But when it comes to conceptual learning, repeating things may in fact be necessary, because again, students might not adapt a new conception right away. It may take time. So again, please don't be afraid to repeat content in your class. I highlight this recommendation to model change. So I also wanted to expand on this and say, don't be afraid to model conceptual learning yourself, to make yourself vulnerable and express to students that times in which your own conceptual understanding of something may have evolved or changed over time. And so don't be afraid to actually model change. As I had said, when it came to diversifying your motivational strategies, I said, you could be autonomy and mastery supportive. So again, I repeat that message here. Be autonomy and mastery supportive. Again, don't be afraid to repeat things because repeating things allows students to master material across time. Being autonomy supportive, I think, is challenging, again, especially for a lot of beginning educators. I'm going to admit here myself, when I began teaching high school biology and introduced students to the lab, I went into the classroom, I went into the lab setting with the intention of being an autonomy supportive educator. And what that means is, supporting students in their own learning, allowing students to feel a sense of personal agency when it comes to their learning. And so I went into the classroom, I went into the lab, and I wanted to be an autonomy supportive educator. But when I introduced my freshman high school students to Bunsen burners, a lot of my students took the Bunsen burners and wanted to convert them into flamethrowers. And so my desire to be autonomy supportive completely left me, and I wanted to take control of the situation. And so I recognize that, again, this was in the early part of my career when I was beginning educator, and I know that yes, as a beginning educator or a new educator, being autonomy supportive, it can be difficult, and it can take time to get used to. And all I can say is, or recommend, is to persist, to hold on to your desire to be an autonomy supportive educator, and hopefully with time you can become that. But again, even I will admit that it took me time to be truly an autonomy supportive educator. I've mentioned before, distribute practice. If you do not like to repeat things, but are open to support student mastery, you can, instead of repeating things, you can distribute your practice across a period of time. So you can distribute your coverage of a particular topic or concept across a longer period of time, as opposed to having to just repeat things with greater frequency. Related to Stryken-Posner's early model of conceptual change. So like I said, it was an early model. It was very linear. It had its limitations. But one of the things that I did like about Stryken-Posner's model is that it said to try to make the content fruitful. And I think that by creating multiple opportunities for students to learn something, by creating, again, multiple opportunities for them, it allows for that task and that content to become fruitful. And so distribute practice and create opportunities for students to, again, multiple opportunities for students to gain mastery. And then finally, I'll promote this as, again, a motivation scholar. Make your content meaningful to students. So make meaningful connections, not only with students and the content, but also make personal connections and meaningful connections with your students. And then promote what we call self-regulation. And so with that said, it brings me to the conclusion of my presentation. I thank you for your time. I thank you for your invitation. And I, again, thank you for your introduction. But I also wanted to provide time if there are any questions concerning what I presented, or questions about conceptual change, or the strategies that I suggested could facilitate conceptual change. And I'll stop sharing my screen.
Participants, any questions? Can you please ask? So, excuse me, sir. So, what's your comment on this span of attention of this current generation of students, sir?
Can you repeat that question? You said like the of students?
Span of attention of current generation students.
Yes. So the span of attention. You know, I don't think that the students' attention spans have changed much across the decades or the length of or capacity of attention span. But I do think that certain behaviors we've seen change not only in the United States, but really globally, and especially it can be observed across the global pandemic the last several years when it comes to greater exposure to virtual classrooms, virtual presentations such as we're doing right now via Zoom. There is what we've seen consistently in the research concerning online learning is that we're seeing that students are gaining engagement even in online learning. So their engagement seems to remain stable and slightly increasing. What's changing though is we're seeing self-regulatory strategies or self-regulation skills decline. And that's a concern. So your question about attention span, I'm not quite sure if I agree that attention spans are changing, but self-regulation skills I do think are changing. And so that gets back to my last take-home message of promoting self-regulation. And the things to promote self-regulation is to help students gain skills when it comes to time management, when it comes to self-regulating their time, self-regulating their emotions, self-regulating their engagement even in online environments. I can only suggest promoting those things. I'm not as much of an expert in self-regulation, and so I apologize if I can't elaborate on my answer here. But again, what I can do is encourage the promotion of self-regulation for sure.
So another participant asked the question. So what is how to improve the teacher-student relationship? Your view on that.
So and so this is another thing, and so I'll give my personal response from my experience, especially in teaching more classes online, is that I recognize that more of my students online, they're at home, and they're not on campus, and I do not have their complete attention and engagement. And so I recognize that they're oftentimes at home. They might have children at home. They might have responsibilities that they're trying to take care of while simultaneously trying to learn. And so I try to do things like I of course record my lectures so that if they want to return and rewatch the lectures, they can do so. I also directly email them and try to have direct communication with them, and try to be understanding that they have lives outside of school, And so instead of students coming to me and asking for extensions, I tell them ahead of time, if something comes up, let me know as soon as possible. Let me know ahead of time as soon as possible so I can make accommodations for you. And by doing that, again, I'm sharing my acknowledgement of their life situation. And so that allows me personally to connect with my students. And so again, that's my personal experience. But there are of course multiple ways of connecting with students. So I'll go back to one of my early take-home messages, which was to take time to learn about your students' misconceptions. And as you do so, as you're learning about their misconceptions, oftentimes you're going to learn about their lives and their experiences. And by sharing or exchanging, your experience as an educator, and let's say if you share the same experience that a student describes, again, that's another way of having and building a connection.
Thank you, sir. Participants, any more questions, please?
Sir, yes, sir.
Yeah, you can unmute yourself and ask, please.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, very good evening. How
Good
the
evening.
present generation teachers can adopt with conceptual changes? How the teachers can adopt with conceptual changes?
How can teachers adopt conceptual change?
Yes, sir.
Again, the models that I presented, taking elements from those models, working with them to, again, I think that in different disciplines, the conceptions, the structure. So I actually think of conceptions as actual structures. And so, I'm like, trying to learn what is the structure of a misconception, and then building it in a way that allows students to follow along and experience that conceptual change. In my own research, and again, I think that it can readily be adopted by others, is I again took time to learn what are the common misconceptions that students might have about influenza and the common cold. So I took time to learn about what are the misconceptions that exist. Because if I don't know what the misconceptions are, then I'm not going to be able to readily correct them or remedy them. And so take time to understand what are the misconceptions, and then think about, okay, what within the misconception, what is the root of that misconception? What parts of those misconceptions can I change? So when it came to the common cold and the flu, a lot of people had misconceptions that it was caused by what we use a generic term in the US, and we say, oh, germs cause the cold and the flu to spread. And that's a big misconception, because when people think about germs, they think about both viruses and biological diseases. And so that one misconception is rooted in not understanding that the flu and the cold is caused specifically by viruses. And so with that being the root of the misconception, correcting that also corrected other misconceptions about the cold and flu. And what I mean is, once you get a learner to understand that the cold and the flu is caused by viruses, that corrects their misconceptions about why antibiotics aren't effective. It corrects their misconceptions about why going outside without a jacket, why you could go outside without a jacket and not get the cold. Now, I know as a parent, I'll admit that even I still, tell my daughters, please wear a coat when you go outside. But I also, I say that just because I want them to be warm. I think that they'll buy outside in cold weather. But anyhow, to get back to your question, so take about your students' misconceptions. Understand what is the structure of those misconceptions, and identifying what could be a root cause of that misconception. And if you can correct that root cause, you could potentially save yourself time as an educator from having to correct every single misconception and just correct a few to so that the other conceptual understandings fall into place. And so that's a strategy. I mentioned that I'm a motivation scholar, and so again, I took motivational strategies to enhance my facilitation of conceptual change. And so again, I recognize that everybody's academic field and discipline could have different misconceptions. All those misconceptions could have different structures. And so to take parts of the models that I shared with you and apply those different elements in ways that are appropriate and best fit your situation. So those would be my recommendations for how educators can promote conceptual change in their class.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So I request all the participants kindly fill up the feedback form within next to 1 hour, please. So please share this feedback form. Can go for this propose the vote of thanks, please. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. We are very happy about your sharing your thoughts, and we are very impressed about this. Take-home message is highly impressive about it. The take-home message is very highly impressive. Thank you very much.
I appreciate that, everybody, and thank you again for your time and the invitation.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
I would like to express my deepest gratitude to all of you for your active participation and engagement throughout this faculty development program. It has been truly enriching experience, valuable exchange of ideas, and meaningful connection filled with insightful discussion on research and teaching strategy for conceptual learning. Today, we have explored various approaches, key takeaway on how to incorporating research-based strategies into our teaching practice. We have the power to create transformative learning experience for our students. Let us be lifelong learners ourselves, always open to growth and improvement. Once again, I thank all the participants and faculty for taking your time and make today's session a successful one. Dear participants, kindly fill the feedback is posted in the chat box. Kindly share your valuable thoughts. Thank you all. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. So kindly share the feedback form in the WhatsApp group also.
Yes, sir.